All right.
Here we are. I sound
Back
like
again.
a little chipmunk. Here we are. Good grieving.
Good grieving. Yeah.
Episode 2.
Yeah. Second one.
Peace. Yeah, here we are. So we actually have a plan.
Yeah, we actually
Well, we did
talked
have a
about it.
plan last time, but
Yeah, this was more preparation.
yeah, we did research.
We have notes and everything.
I know. Look,
Written down on paper.
we both did it. I thought you would just come and just go right off the cuff.
Oh no, I needed some notes. I did quite a lot of reading for this episode.
I'm so
Yeah,
and he's
I'm really
so
excited.
knowledgeable. I'll probably speak from the heart, and you can do the data. But
Yeah.
so this is Sterling, and
Hello.
I'm Kathy, and we are your hosts for Good Grieving, or what is it? Your hosts for Good Grieving? I guess so. Is that how you'd say it?
Yeah, I would say so.
Sure.
Yeah, let's
Sure.
do that. Let's go on
Okay, so today's topic is a hot topic.
Mhm.
One that's been out there since 1969, I believe. Do you have that in your notes?
I don't have it in my notes, but I did make a mental note of it. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yes, the 5
talking
stages
about,
of grief.
Right.
And actually, it's from her book on death and dying.
Right.
So interesting that it became the 5 stages of grief.
Right, and I found it interesting because she actually wrote multiple books. And the one I read, or I looked at a couple of quotes from, so she did Death and Dying, and she followed up with Grief and Grieving.
Oh.
And that was one of the stages where she refuted some of the things that, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, so we are racing ahead.
Mm-hmm. She had some concerns about her initial findings when it came to death and dying.
Yes, there has been so much controversy over this. Yeah. And I can tell you that when a friend of mine died, actually a mutual friend of ours died in a motorcycle accident, his wife actually gave me the 5 stages of grief book. She gave it to all of us. Well, then she actually learned some other things and said this, well, we all read it. And I remember reading it going, what? Like, so if I go through these, which is really interesting, because I think when you're grieving, and we all are looking, no, I shouldn't say we all are, but we're in a society where there's the quick fixes. Right. So you think, oh, okay, so if I go through these 5 stages, and the 5 stages are?
I don't have the right notes in front of me. You go ahead.
I thought you were, I was just giving you, I know
wasn't prepared
denial,
for that.
anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance.
That's right.
And I think if you look a little bit further into it, there's even a couple more. One is shock, and then the other one was very similar to bargaining.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the word, but
there have been a few different models built on that. And actually it's interesting that you say that there's a couple of different ones so some of them have different numbers of stages. Some of them talk about the stages with different names.
Yeah.
They all kind of, the current model that is being taught around the world when it comes to medical training, or also when it comes to psychology, it's still 5, but now they describe them as disbelief, yearning, anger, depression, and acceptance. So very similar, but there are some differences to it. And we've talked about this at length.
Do you notice like my body language?
Yeah, exactly. We've talked about this at length about why this is still problematic. They've changed the words. They've changed some of the understanding of it. There's been some more research that's to some extent given a little bit more validity to that, but it's still very hotly debated, and there's no consensus.
It is. It's so interesting. I'm like, I really believe that we as a human race have the universal experience of grieving, but it's a unique feeling to us, or expression. Grief is very much, when we talked about this last week, last episode, that it's a reflection of the relationship. And anyway, with this book that I got, I remember going through it and thinking, okay, when I heard that he had died, I knew that I didn't deny it. So I was like, okay, check. I got that one.
Right.
I wasn't angry. I didn't even, that wasn't an emotion. I know for some people, anger does show up.
Absolutely.
But there's usually underlying things. It's not, it can be so much more than that. Anger can be hurt. It can mean a whole bunch of different things. Yeah. bargaining, who was I going to bargain with? Depression. No, people really can confuse grief because there's a lot of similar the way that our bodies react and our emotions can be very it lines up with, oh, that's depression.
Absolutely.
And then acceptance, which I think that right there for me with the denial, I had accepted it. So they were right together. Right. And you had a really good point about that, about acceptance.
Right. So one of the well, I should say the first empirical study that was ever actually conducted about the stage theory of grief was in 2007. So it's fairly recent, and I mean, I say that it's 2024 right now. It's quite a long time
we're not getting any younger.
When we compare that to 1969,
yes,
with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's first literature that was released about it, this is pretty much modern day. And so the empirical study, the reason they did it was because this has all been more or less anecdotal conjecture. There hadn't been an empirical study done where they tried to really codify and quantify a lot of this stuff. And when they did, they found that at every different time period, they did up to 2 years post-loss. So they did the first 6 months, the second 6 months, third 6 months, and so on. Those 6 month periods of time, and they checked in to have conversations with the bereaved and find out what was the emotion they were feeling the most keenly, and they talked about it in terms of frequency. So how often do you have feelings of this, or how often do you have thoughts around this emotion? So again, there's discussion around some of the methods and things like that, but generally speaking, it was pretty well accepted. But at every stage that they measured, acceptance was the most commonly felt and experienced emotion. So acceptance isn't the final stage for a lot of people. It happens, it's what they feel, and they think that it happens, it goes between these different emotions. So they had to look and quantify it in terms of how frequently do you feel these different types of things.
Right.
And so again, we're not talking about first you feel disbelief, then you feel yearning, then you feel anger, then you feel depression, then you feel acceptance. That was not what the findings found at all. But when they collect all the data from, I mean, this was a test, it was a longitudinal study, which means it took place over a period of months or years. As I said, they checked in with these people over a couple of years, and it was over 260 participants throughout the rest of it, or throughout the length of it, rather. And each person's individual experience was different. But they have to collect all this data and put it into...
And they got to make it a neat little box. This is, look.
Right.
You can check these boxes off. And I think, you know what, I read a lot of, and I wasn't actually looking for negative feedback. I was just throwing it out there, the 5 stages of grief. And everything that I kept reading was that, number one, she developed the book for terminally ill patients to actually face their own, who are facing their own death.
Right.
And even in that, though, she refuted some of it. Like, you can't, not all dying people. Like, this is what's so frustrating is they want to make it, I want to make this easy for you, doctor. This is, then you can just say to here's an antidepressant because you're grieving. And you know what? You got like 1 or 2 years and you'll be fine. Right. Because data does say, I think it's a year that you will be over your grief. Yeah, and that's like, what kind of data? Who's doing the data? Well, and that it's interesting you bring that up because Kubler-Ross's original model assumed a 6-month time frame. After 6 months, you'll have experienced these various emotions. Yeah, and you'll be good to go. And you'll have moved past the state of grieving and on to living your new life, whatever that may look like. So, and again, well, I shouldn't even say that because her original thesis was talking about people that were understanding and coming to terms with their own imminent death. True. So she's looking at this going, for people that have just been told you are going to die sometime soon. Yeah. The prognosis is 8 months, a year, something like that. In 6 months, you'll have come to terms with it and accepted the fact that you're going to die. So we'll take that and paste it with grief. Right. And you get that. That's where I think people end up hearing from their friends and family. Are you over this yet? Like, you should be over this. Right. Like, and we don't get over grief. We carry it. It doesn't mean that we won't feel happy. It doesn't mean we won't feel joy or excitement. It means that we learn to adjust to the weight of our grief. And yeah, I'll just circle back. It was never intended for grief. And what's so great is that she brought. I have to commend her because she brought the topic of death and dying into the conversation.
Yeah.
Well, it stopped somewhere along the way, but if we're picking it up in 2024, yeah, like she was very curious and wanted to actually help.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't an effort to help, and I think because psychologists and psychiatrists and doctors really didn't have a template for grief, they're like, did you see this? This is perfect. Because, maybe, and I can't say that you won't feel any of these. You may feel all of them.
Absolutely.
But it's not linear.
No, exactly. And you may feel all of these in this order. You may feel them one after another. There's nothing saying that this is not acceptable for you to feel. It's not that this is not a perfectly normal and healthy way to process your grief by experiencing different levels of different emotions from throughout time. And it may be that you feel that you've come to a place of acceptance and comfort with your grief, and you don't feel the weight of it every day after 6 months. That's totally fine. What the problem is, and this is what Dr. Kubler-Ross also cautioned against, is the fact that this tends to oversimplify the variability and the complexity of what grief really is. And one of the big concerns about this, and why she spoke about her concerns about it being used as widespread as it was because she was worried, and this is also one of the big criticisms that I think you and I both share about the stage-based model of grief, is that people that are grieving will worry that they're doing it wrong.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. That is one of the things.
Why? What's wrong with me that I can't fit this?
Said something very poignant. What's wrong with me? There is nothing wrong with you. Right. You have experienced a significant loss in your life.
Absolutely.
And it's, and yeah, I will say, I remember looking at these and going, what am I doing? Like, I didn't experience this. Will I experience this? Am I going through it backwards? Like, it was just, it's not something. I don't believe in stages. I believe, kind of like what you were saying, there's, we've talked about it before, there's ebbs and flows.
Absolutely.
It is definitely not linear.
No.
And it's just, it sets people up to get really stuck. Really stuck because you think, and you don't have language. You see it right here. It's like denial. Well, you know what I would do, like for me, and I should have done this, but it's like, okay, this is your homework, is you take these: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, those 5 words, and you put that into, like, put it on a piece of paper and then find words to describe what denial is.
Right.
And then anger, and then kind of go, oh yeah, I felt those, or no, I sometimes I feel them, but dig into it, because like we said, you can feel all of these. And I can tell you, when John took his last breath, I was in probably fight mode, a trauma response for sure, but I was experiencing anticipatory grief. When he took his last breath, and I had my hand on his chest, and I knew he wasn't breathing anymore, and the nurse was saying, no, he's still breathing. And I'm like, no, he's not. I had to help her through that process. But I had accepted it that moment. There was no denying that he was not dead.
Well, and here's an interesting point too. When we talk about these different stages, I think it's also important to talk about why a one-size-fits-all solution doesn't fit beyond just the individual relationship. But the circumstances surrounding the moment when you come to terms with the fact that this person is going to be gone or is gone. There are people that learn about the death of a loved one from the police after a terrible accident. I was going to
say that it's a surprise. They're out of town.
There's illness. There's all these different kinds of things that can happen, and the timeline, the time frame through which you're processing the idea that this is terminal, or that this person is going to be gone, processing the concept of that loss. It could be a sudden shock. The person could be near the end of their life. Grieving an elderly relative that died of old age is vastly different from grieving the loss of a child or the loss of a spouse. there's all these different types of grief, and the way that you learn about it, where the
Oh,
person was.
there's so many factors.
In addition to the fact that the person's relationship to you, as you've said, and as you say in your book, the grief is a reflection of the relationship, and the fact is that's one piece that is absolutely huge. But there are also a whole myriad of other factors that can affect how you come to terms with the news that this person is gone or is going to be gone. It's so complex.
Well, and I would even say, like, when I said, like, I accepted it right there. I was right there. I had my hand on his chest. There was physical evidence. So if I got the phone call and he was out of town, I don't know. I can't say what I would feel. I think there's many options, but it'd be like, I need evidence, right? Before I can accept this.
Right.
So, and that's exactly to your point. It's like every situation has its uniqueness. There's different variables. So people telling us that we should feel a certain way, it's not their place. They can't tell us how to feel, and they don't know how we feel.
No, and I think that's where I think good doctors, good psychologists, good psychiatrists, good bereavement counselors, whatever role that is that they're playing, I think if they're good at what they do, it's not going to be nearly so much about trying to tell people how they feel, though that does come up a frightening amount, where people tend to take it on themselves, whether they're professionals trying to guide a person through their grief, or whether they're just people that know enough to be dangerous, and they start saying, aren't you over this by now? Those kinds of things, because they've heard about the fact that you go through these stages. It does a disservice to the bereaved when a person expects them to feel something other than they're feeling, and makes them feel like there's something that they should or should not be feeling at a given time, because of some model or some structure that is intended. I mean, the whole point of all these studies that have been going on, the point is to try to inform the scientific community at large about what general expectations they can have of a patient, so that they can go, okay, this person has been absolutely jammed up and it's impacting their life in an incredibly negative way.
We've sedated her.
Right. What do we do if we start to find, they're trying to define what could be considered healthy, normal, etc. Normal is a word I absolutely hate.
I know. Yeah. And healthy grief.
How they should, all these other kinds of words. But that's what the scientific and medical community wants. They want a template that they can understand if this is something they need to intervene and try something different, or if this is something that they can let play out and the person's going to come through it. And I understand that motivation. But when it comes to a griever trying to figure out how am I going through this, that model and that whole structure and the design for it kind of goes out the window. It's very similar in looking at this. When I was looking at this research, it reminded me of when they talk about the efficacy of drugs and medication. Talk about, some people have heard about an ED or an LD, an effective dose or a lethal dose. When it comes to that, they call it an LD50. Is the lethal dose in 50% of the test subjects. So when they're doing, whatever kind of studies they're doing, not with human trials, obviously, but
they'll just
when they're testing pharmaceuticals and they try and find out how much of this is dangerous. The closest they can find is that this killed half of the people when we gave it to half of the test subjects when they got to this
which
dose.
Would be animals.
Yeah, unfortunately, usually, thankfully, it's not.
We're not going to put any judgment.
But the unfortunate reality is that when scientists are trying to find out information about new things, they have to do testing, and part of that testing is finding out what is safe for humans. And the closest they can come is saying that this is probably going to be very dangerous for half the people at this dose.
So great.
That's the closest thing. So they define these really extreme parameters and then they operate within them. This is the same thing. They're talking about how do we define the extent, and that's not useful.
They want to make it. They want what I'm like. What I keep hearing is like they want to make it as simple as possible for them, because doctors are healers.
Yes.
Something that I found out when I was I do end of life work. So I was sitting with a palliative care doctor as she was talking to her patient, and he had been told by an ER doctor who'd done his CT scan, things look really bad. And this man has been battling cancer, metastatic. He's outlived his life expectancy. So his CT scan does not look good. Anyway, the palliative care doctor is like, he doesn't know you, so he's told you that you have 2 weeks.
Right.
She said, I can't say that. What he ended up having, he had pancreatitis. Okay. So that caused him a lot of pain, and it can knock you right out of the ball game. So he's in a trial where, okay, so they're testing him.
Right.
And what happened was it can work, but it can flare up your cancer to a point, and then it settles down and shrinks your cancer. It can do a lot of really good things, or it can kill you. So he hit this really rough patch.
Right.
So he is now on his last weeks, months.
Right.
But the palliative care doctor said, she said, okay, I am here in, sorry, my dog is sniffing the camera. I'm here, the palliative care is about quality of life.
Right.
Oncologists are about quantity of life.
Right.
So they work together a lot of the time, because you don't need to be dying to have palliative care. That's comfort care.
Right.
Anybody can have it. Anyway, so I found it very interesting. And then once the oncologist knows there's nothing else we can do for you, they're out of the ball game. Out of it. Yeah. So you're looking at, we're going to make the quality of your life as best we can. That's what the palliative care doctor said. And I have experienced that in the medical system. So with, in regard to that was like kind of off topic, but in regard to psychologists and psychiatrists, they are in the game of healing as well. So if they have a template going, okay, these are the things that we're going to go through. These are the stages. And now you're in the beginning stages. So here's denial, and here are the tools.
Right.
Here's anger, and here are the tools.
Right.
And it's like, and then once you're through, in 6 months, we'll come back and we'll talk about your trauma.
Right. Right. And it's interesting, actually, talking about scientists, doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, the different various types of professionals that are looking at this. One of the most interesting studies that I looked at was from 2014, and it was talking about the what they call the biopsychosocial model. And this comes up a lot in psychological research, where they try to look at the biological aspects, the psychological aspects, and the social aspects of any given situation, whatever it is. So they look at this, they use a biopsychosocial model for all different kinds of aspects of mental health, physical health, whatever it is. They try and make a holistic model and say, how does this affect people? And the results were wild, to put it mildly. But when it comes to grief, people can and do die of a broken heart 2 times more frequently than the non-bereaved matched for age. They found that not only was the immune system affected really profoundly, it changed the neurochemistry and the structure of the brain in the process of grieving. There was massive hormonal changes that happened in some instances, and very minor changes that happened in others, but they can affect cardiovascular health and all kinds of other things. So not only is this realistically something that is very unique and different, but part of the reason that I think it's really important for doctors to keep a very open mind when it comes to grief, and not look at the stages of emotions, but look at, there's a very real physical interaction that happens.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad that you brought that up.
Individually is really, really important when it comes to caring for people as they are grieving. Because a lot of these things come up, people that end up getting really sick. You mentioned in your book that you got really sick after John had his heart attack, right?
You were just
absolutely laid up sick.
Yeah.
Not a surprise at all, because immense stress and the kinds of stress that comes from grieving in particular can cause your immune system to behave very, very strangely, very suddenly. So all those kinds of things are worth bringing into or keeping in mind. And this stage model of grief is emotional, cognitive, psychological.
It's not talking anything. And
it's
I love that you brought that up. Thank you. Because in grief, you look at it, and some of the, like, we're all unique, but many of us do experience exhaustion, brain fog.
Mm-hmm.
Like you cannot think, like you're in the middle of a sentence and you're like, what were you listening? Because I don't have any idea what I was saying. That happened so much in the beginning.
Yeah.
Your appetite completely changes. There's just, you ache. You can have accidents, like you can run into things. You can have accidents in your car. You can be driving and have absolutely no idea like where you drove past, or like it's actually kind of frightening.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's so many things that correlate with the emotions, and it's devastating.
Mm-hmm.
And so for somebody to say to you, okay, thank you for coming in, and here we're going to go through the stages of grief, and you can actually feel like, again, those are expectations. There's something wrong with me because I can't seem to get through this.
Right.
And I'm so tired. And, well, you know what? We have a pill for that. We'll give you, I can't sleep. Well, we're going to give you a sleeping pill. But I'm really groggy during the day. So we're going to give you anti-anxiety or something. Does anti-anxiety make you more relaxed? You would think.
It usually just takes a bit of the edge off. It doesn't necessarily make you more relaxed, but it would make you less anxious. I guess it's kind of two sides of the same coin. But anxiolytics basically just make it so that you can think about other things than the things you're worrying about.
So I feel like we can over-medicate people when we're not looking at the whole picture. It doesn't mean I'm actually on antidepressant, anti-anxiety, because after I wrote the book, it was just a crushing wave of, I just felt this extreme heaviness. And I think it was just, it was everything. Like it was everything, going through it all again. And so there's no shame in being on any kind of medication, and I can sleep.
Yeah.
But it's one little pill.
Right. And I think that's one thing that's really, really important to bring up. And I'm glad you did. And it ties in with what we were just talking about too, with the biopsychosocial model, the idea that your body does things that it didn't used to do when you go through the process of grieving. And something that a lot of people get jammed up on. Well, again, I say a lot of people, I shouldn't say that. I have met people that have, there's a stigma associated with medication when it comes to antidepressants and sleeping pills and things like that. And there's also an attitude that I've noticed in quite a lot of people that once you're on it, you have to stay on it.
Yeah.
You have to take this medication for the rest of your life because something is just not going to be the same in you, and that's not necessarily the case either. When it comes to,
again, it's unique.
Exactly, it comes down to the individual, what they're experiencing, and there may be a time in a person's life while they're grieving where an antidepressant is going to help them get through.
Right, and that's exactly what I feel.
Really heavy depression, or when their sleep is disrupted, or when they have, as you say, pronounced anxiety, or if they're, whatever the psychological and physiological symptoms are that they're experiencing as they're going through grief. They don't have to just go through it with absolutely no assistance from medication or from therapy or anything else. And if there are tools like that at your disposal, absolutely, it's worth investigating. It's worth trying some of these things to help make it more manageable, to help you cope as you're going through this.
There's no shame in it. And I think that there's a lot of shame associated with grieving, especially if you're in year 2 or you've moved past the 6-month mark, you're year 5. I talk to women who are 20 years in and get grief gut punches. Like, I mean, it's whatever happens in your brain. The one thing I can tell you is there's a spot. I mean, this is not scientific, but there is a compartment that holds them, the people that you lost, that the most significant person in your life. I can't say but there's, all the people that I've lost are kind of up there. But the biggest loss is probably the most significant and the most immediate. It's always there. So I find like it's really easy. I don't actually have to draw upon thinking about him. He's always there, and people will be like, why? Like, can't you shut that off? No, I can't.
No. And I love the fact that you brought up time, because this was the other topic that we had discussed a little bit, and I did a little bit of looking into specifically as as time is applied to grief and some of the misconceptions around it, and one of the ones, as you brought up before and we've talked about again at length, is the idea that time heals all wounds. And the fact is, time doesn't actually do anything other than
just
pass by
keeps
at a
ticking.
set rate. Yeah. What time does is allow for the mechanisms that allow healing to take place to do what they do.
Yeah.
But that is also something that's very, very individual. People heal at different rates. People heal from infections. They heal from diseases. They heal from injuries. Some people heal completely from injuries that other people feel for the rest of their lives. You cannot say that time heals everything, because what time does is just allow those things to take place. And
that's what you do within time.
Right. And the fact is that time, as it passes, does we do see over the passage of time that certain things do fairly reliably take place. And one of the things that came up that I found really interesting was a study from 2006 that talked about, they spoke with widows about the loss they had. Primarily it was widows. There were some widowers in there as well, but what they talked about was how they felt over time as time went by, and how their attitudes towards death changed, and the kinds of thoughts that they had, the kinds of emotions they experienced. And the one thing that did come up was, of course, our experiences of grief and our attitudes towards death did change.
Sterling, you keep talking. Okay. I have to let my dog out.
Okay.
Keep talking.
So time obviously does correlate with changes happening. Change is something that takes time to occur, generally speaking, especially small changes or incremental changes over time. One of the things that they found was that people that had lost their spouse found that their attitudes towards death and that their experiences of their grief on a day-to-day basis would change as time went by. But again, there wasn't any consistent consensus about what should happen at what times or any of that. And as you said, 20 years on, you find people that they still have. In this study, they discussed how often the bereaved, I keep referring to that as the literature, but the person who lost their spouse, they would think about them or talk about them weekly, daily, monthly, 20 years, 30 years on.
Yeah.
After decades, this person is still a regular part of their lived experience, through memories, through emotional connections to things, through all manner of things. So the first studies that I was talking about earlier was talking about things that, 6 months to a year to 18 months to 2 years. We're talking about decades on in the future. This stuff is still, it's not like you come to a point and go, well, I'm over it, and that's the end of it.
And I think the only way you can actually get over it is to forget everything, like to completely lose your memory.
Yeah.
And that's not going to happen. Well, it might happen later in life for me, but it's like at this point, it's a part of my memory. But it's interesting about the time factor because, over time, it's what we do within time. And it's like it's like, okay, so here's day one. This is year 5. Mm-hmm. What happened over the course of that time? Mm-hmm. There's things that we process. We start to step into our life. We learn to adjust to the weight of it. Like that I did a blog post about, and many people have used this analogy about a backpack. Mm-hmm. And it's like, initially the backpack is so heavy, you can barely pick it up. You can't take it off. And then you learn to adjust to the weight. And then sometimes the weight, again, you get way more rocks in there. There's just a lot, and it ebbs and flows. Mm-hmm. And I think, again, year 5, I can't speak to that because I'm not there personally, but year 2, I will share something with you, and this will be very interesting, Sterling. So Monday, I was feeling this extreme heaviness. Like I was just like, it was my youngest daughter's 40th birthday. Yeah. The girls were over. We had a great time. But we did not really mention John. We didn't really talk about him. Right. And I think we were all very conscious of him not being there, which generally was when we did girl things, he was going to watch hockey or he did something else. Yeah. So it wasn't like he would have been with us, but he would have been with us. Yeah, around. So we didn't mention him. And then Monday, after everything had settled and, people gone home and done their, gone back to their lives, I'm like, I wake up, I'm just feeling like crap. I wanted to cry. I wanted to cry and I couldn't. Right. I turned on the music I know that when I turn the knob, the waterworks will happen. If you've ever seen, oh my gosh, what is it called? It's Harrison Ford is in it. Shrinking? Is it Shrinking? Oh, it's so good. I think it's on Apple TV and it's about grief. And they talk about, I think it's Shrinking. You need to watch it. Anyway, they talk about having a 15-minute grief moment where you put on the saddest music and you give yourself 15 minutes to just let her fly. and then, because a lot of these people are very busy, they have, it's just how you cope. I wouldn't say it's, but actually I was going to say, I wouldn't say it's a great idea, but then part of me was like, this could be a really good release. Not working. Nothing's working, but I could feel like this heaviness. And, grief is not, what I was trying to do was call upon a reaction.
Right.
That I couldn't actually get. And then Tuesday, I was just like, okay, can you just stop? I don't even know what's happening. And I didn't, but I never had a really big cry. I was just weepy.
Right.
So it's really interesting to me because I used to not be able to cry. I used to have a really, really hard time with crying, but I haven't. Yeah. What does that even mean, doctor?
Well, that's the thing I think that's what's so baffling about a lot of this stuff is because the emotions that come in throughout the grieving process are, as we've talked about a lot, they're very varied. There's a lot of difference in extremes. They can happen really fast, one after another. They can coexist at the same time.
Yep.
Grief is one of those really, really pivotal and sort of life-changing experiences for a lot of people.
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of people end up with PTSD after a severe spell of grief. The current literature is looking at trying to define what is abnormal grief. What are the kinds of things that could potentially be leading into other more serious?
Well, yeah, like there's complex and compound, and there's all these different, which we'll have to get into that. We'll unpack that.
Absolutely, yeah. Prolonged grief is one that I found really interesting because there was a lot of discussion about what makes grief prolonged. At what point do we say this is longer than it should be?
Yeah, I was like, initially, the hair on the back of my neck, I'm like, are you kidding me? But I get it because you have to put a label on it.
Right.
And even in that, it's like we're putting a label. This is grief. There could be a whole lot of other things in there.
Yeah.
And we're blaming it on our grief,
right?
Or
I love that you said that. Because I didn't even think about that. I didn't think about that at all. But labeling this unbelievably complicated series of emotions that can last for a widely varying length of time for all kinds of different reasons, we label it with a name that is grief. And grief, that's that one word is doing a lot of heavy lifting. Like,
yes, oh my gosh,
so much packed up in that.
You know what I want to do is we were going to call this the ABCs of grief,
right?
And I brought it to one of my groups that I work with, and they're like, "Could we do the ABCs of grief?" So every week we do a different letter, and I want to do like a sheet of words, but we have where I said, listen, great. We're going to do different like words for grief, A words. But I said, can we do words for joy or something positive? Like I hate to put like a value on like a feeling, but it's like, okay, there's the different types. So it's so fascinating. And there's words that you can use for both the joy and the pain. And so next week, we're on to the letter F, and we all started laughing and said, well, we know what our first word will be. So do you have anything else to say on this amazing subject?
I do have one more thing. Yes. And I would love to get your thoughts on this from your own personal experiences. One of the things that came up when I was doing a bit of research about this, I wasn't conscious of it and I wasn't looking for it, but I'm so glad that I dug into this a little bit more. And that is time disruptions when people are experiencing grief. There are a lot of people that experience feelings of being stuck or feeling like when their person died, they got trapped and they couldn't, the world was around them was moving, but they were still stuck in that moment or in that day. or they didn't understand how much time had passed. They lost track of how much time had passed. There was comments about people feeling frozen in time, feeling that they were just in total disarray when it came to understanding how much time had passed, or what they were feeling, and all these things. And I wanted to get your thoughts on your perception of time in the days and weeks.
Wow. Could you hold, please? I'll be right back. Yeah, that's fascinating. I'll be right back. I just have to get my very obnoxious dog.
So the reason I brought this up, and I'll just explain a little bit of this while Kathy's getting Wendell. When we experience really extreme emotions, one of the things that can happen is that we can experience different personal perceptions of the passage of time. People describe it a lot when they have panic situations, when they have life and death moments, when they feel that they are close to a calamity, that they feel that their life is about to end themselves in an accident or something like that. A lot of people talk about things, time slowed down, or when they're having the best time of their life and all the time just flashed by in an instant. Grief is one of those big pivotal moments, and it's one of those, not moments, but one of those big life-changing sort of experiences. And it makes perfect sense that disruptions in your perception of time would take place. Did you feel a lot of that yourself, or when you've gone through a lot of this grief education, is that something that comes up? Because I'm very curious.
I find it with people. Like I didn't, I think in the anticipatory grief part of this whole process for me, time, no, it was very strange because it either moved I felt it moved really, really quickly. Actually, I felt it moved really, really quickly the whole time, actually. Right. After, again, it was like time stood still, and I knew what day it was. I knew that it was the next day. I knew I was moving through time, which, again, you're looking at the world where nothing has stopped, and your world has just come crashing down. But I personally never got stuck in the past. No, I didn't get stuck in the past. I would have memories, but you know what? Give me a second. I had reoccurring nightmares of the event of him dying for months. Months. And I had a really hard time sleeping. I would wake up thinking of that. So it wasn't like, I guess those were the moments when everything stopped.
Yeah.
Then I was back in that moment. So I guess, I guess there was kind of a bit of that, but I do find that with people that I talk to and work with, that they come to me because they are feeling so stuck, and they're afraid that if they step out into their life, that diagram about the box is your life and then your grief. So in the beginning, grief is hitting all sides of the box.
Right.
And then you go along and the box appears to get bigger. Or sorry, the box appears to get bigger, but your grief appears to get smaller. What's happened is actually your life is getting bigger and your grief stays the same size. And so it's really interesting, and people are afraid to step into their life because if they step into their life, that means they're getting over or they're leaving it behind, and none of that is true.
No,
I mean, you can move on, and this is what gets very silly about when we talk about a sensitive subject like grief. Like if you say, I'm getting over it, you can't say you're getting over it. You never get over grief.
No.
You got to move through it. You can't go around it. To heal, you have to go through it. It's like all these things, and it's like, if you use the words, I moved on, that gives people the impression you're never looking back again. You're forgetting them. Whatever term you use, you move forward. You're still going to bring them with you.
Of course. Because that's the thing is, I like that
Just
analogy.
know in 20 years, you're going to be crying.
I like that analogy of the box being your life and the grief takes up such a huge part of it, which especially when it comes to the loss of somebody like John. He was a huge part of your life for the vast majority of your life. Right? And then all of a sudden, he has left this enormous absence. And it's present in all of the things you do throughout the course of a day. Right? Like you guys were retired together. You guys worked together. You had your own careers separately. You did all kinds of things with your family together. all these different aspects. And so there's not going to be a part of your day-to-day life that you don't see his absence in right in the beginning. And as you say, people but a lot of people can find themselves afraid to move past that. They don't want to pick up with the passage of time again. And it's interesting, you said you were always aware of what day it was. That was one of the things I found so fascinating about this. And I don't mean to be insensitive about any of this, but I do find myself getting fascinated by the quirks and the foibles of how people's brains work in any circumstances. So this was one of the things I found so interesting.
We need to write down. We're going to talk grief brain. We're going to
grief brain.
That will be coming up.
Okay.
There's a really good book, and I think we both, I've read it, but I think I need to read it again. It's very interesting because it's a lot of research. So research is data.
Yeah.
But it's also, there's a lot of feelings in it, and a lot, it does not tell you you're going to get over grief.
Right.
But really interesting. And they not only did studies and sitting and going, so how are you feeling, Sterling?
Yeah.
They also did imaging.
Right.
So it's very much next level kind of thing. So I think that would be fascinating. So grief brain would be good.
Grief brain, I'm very excited to talk more about that. That's a really rich topic to get into a discussion about. But just this time disruption thing. There's one last thing. When you said you knew what day it was, you knew that things were going on. That was one of the most common things that I've read in some of the literature, was that people didn't fully lose track of time. They felt that they weren't able to move through it with everybody else. That was one of the most common things.
Yes, you feel like you're on the outside. Stuck. Yeah, what you're doing is you're watching the world.
Yeah, just carrying on
here's an example. Walking through the grocery store, and it can be like this is Oreo. It can be like you're walking in slow motion.
Yeah.
And especially in the early days, it can be very emotional for people in the grocery store, and I was one of them. The animals are saying, "Wrap this up, people." Yeah. We will, but it's almost like you're if you start cleaning other parts of them. Oh, it was Wendell was.
Wendell's been licking them.
Yeah. Anyway. So this is real TV, real grief, good grief.
Yeah.
These are my animals. They're healing. But anyway, it can be like you're walking through mud, like you're walking through slow motion.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen those videos where people are whipping by and then this other person is moving really, really slowly, that actually is how I felt. And the grocery store is just one example. And it would be like you're trying to hold yourself together as you look over, and I think I've told you this, as you look over at the Oriental Party Pack that you used to pick up for him for Hockey Night in Canada, and you burst out crying, and you're like, how do I get out of this?
Yeah.
And it's exactly it. You're just slowly moving through, putting your head down, watching everybody else live their life. And I never ever once thought, and I've had people tell me this, they're like, how can they keep living, like doing all these things when he died? And it's like, because they didn't know him, because they're supposed to be living your life. That's what life is for.
Yeah.
Even though we're grieving, the world is not grieving with us.
Yeah. That's it. I mean, what a great conversation, Kath.
Thanks, Sterling. It was really good. I love your brain. I love how you dig into things. And I think that there's so much more to this topic. And I mean, like, we call it good grieving. We call it good, bad, and the ugly grieving.
Yeah.
It's honestly, it's good to grieve.
It is. It's necessary. It's one of those things that, I mean, and again, we've talked about this in the past too, about the fact that difficult emotions that are either complicated to unpack, or they're just hard to feel because they're very intense and they make you feel all kinds of things that you didn't, you're not ready to dig into that stuff. It's the instinct we have a lot of the time is to push back, to try and avoid this stuff. But the reality is that grief is one of those things that the best way for a person to grieve is to grieve.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
That's it.
The best way. It's just do it. And we're so used to stuffing it down because it's uncomfortable. Pain is uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Grief has pain in it. Grief is full of love. Love has pain in it.
Absolutely.
Life has pain in it. So on that note, tune in next time as we probably, I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but it's going to be interesting.
Absolutely. I'm intrigued by grief brain. I think that would be a fantastic conversation.
And
thank you.
As always, the pets will be here. And so will we.
Absolutely.